Right now, or later tonight, you'll climb into a bed in a room sitting at a temperature you specifically chose, 65 degrees, maybe 68. You didn't build anything to get there. You touched a small plastic panel on the wall, and somewhere behind the drywall, a compressor did the actual work while you brushed your teeth. You will not think about this for even 1 second. It will simply happen, the way it happens every night of your entire life. Now strip all of that away. 200,000 years ago, in a rock shelter in southern Africa, the stone walls around you have been baking in the sun since dawn, and they are still radiating that heat directly at you well after dark. The air is thick enough to feel like breathing through a damp towel. Every insect within 100 yards has found you, and your brain, exactly like it does tonight, still needs your core temperature to drop before it will let you lose consciousness. Except nothing here is cooperating. So here's the actual mystery. For hundreds of thousands of years, with zero fans, zero refrigerant, zero concept of a thermostat, how did human beings sleep on nights that should have made sleep completely impossible? The answer runs through your own skin. A bed built out of ash, and a discovery so strange researchers initially couldn't believe what they were looking at. Let's go. Start with the body itself, because it's doing something genuinely unusual for a mammal. You carry somewhere between 2 and 4 million eccrine sweat glands, a density far beyond almost anything else in the animal kingdom. Most mammals cool by panting, which tops out fast. A 2018 study led by researcher Andrew Best at the University of Massachusetts Amherst found that this dramatically elevated gland density, in some spots reaching several hundred glands per square centimeter, likely evolved as a direct response to sustained heat exposure once early humans left shaded forest for open savanna, somewhere between 2 and 3 million years ago. Here's the detail that changes everything about that trade. Losing body hair wasn't only useful for daytime hunting, it was quietly a sleep technology. Fur traps heat against skin. Strip it away, and your bare skin becomes a radiator, dumping heat into the surrounding air fastest exactly when that air finally starts cooling, after dark. Your ancestors weren't just built to survive noon. They were built to survive midnight too. But there's a limit to what biology alone can do. Sweating that hard has a fatal flaw baked directly into it. Every hour of heavy sweat costs your body close to a full liter of fluid, and in a genuinely hot, dry environment, that moisture can evaporate almost the instant it reaches your skin. Brilliant for cooling, brutal for hydration. The very system keeping your ancestors alive at night was also quietly working against them. Think about that for a second. You can sweat all night. If the air around you is already as hot as your skin, there's nowhere for that heat to actually go. This is the wall every warm climate ancestor eventually hit, and it's why they stopped relying on biology alone and started engineering. The oldest evidence of that engineering sits inside Border Cave, on the border of South Africa and Eswatini. In 2020, archaeologist Lynn Wadley of the University of the Witwatersrand published findings in the journal Science documenting layered grass bedding dated to roughly 200,000 years old, the oldest known constructed bed on Earth. Here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. The bedding sat on a foundation of ash, not dirt, deliberately maintained and relayered across generations. That ash did two jobs at once. It insulated sleepers from ground that had been quietly cooking in the sun all day, and it dehydrated any insect that tried to burrow into the grass, clogging its breathing structures completely. Traces of camphor bush, still used today across parts of East Africa as a natural insect repellent, were mixed directly into the layers. This wasn't an accident of convenience. This was pharmacology, built out of ash and grass, 200 millennia before the word pharmacology existed. Honestly, respect. Here's something that overturns an assumption you've probably never questioned. You'd expect ancient humans slept from sundown straight through to sunrise. They didn't. In 2015, researcher Gandhi Yetish, working alongside UCLA sleep scientist Jerome Siegel, tracked 3 present-day hunter-gatherer groups living under conditions close to ancestral ones: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. Average sleep across all 3 groups ran just 6.4 hours a night, genuinely less than most people get in fully air-conditioned homes today. And here's the part that matters. Sleep onset didn't track darkness. It tracked temperature. People fell asleep as the air was actively cooling and woke close to the coldest point of the night, typically right before dawn. On hot nights, sleep started later and ran shorter, sometimes nearly an hour less than during cooler seasons. The body wasn't waiting for the sun to go down. It was waiting for permission from the air itself. If you're sleeping less on the hottest nights, that's a problem, because you still need the deep sleep your brain uses for memory and repair. So how did the group actually cope with less? In 2017, anthropologist David Sampson at the University of Toronto fitted Hadza of campers with wrist-worn sensors for 20 straight nights and found something remarkable. Across the entire study, there were only 18 total minutes where every single person in camp was asleep at once. 18 minutes across 20 nights. That gap wasn't random. It tracked natural chronotype, older members drifting off and waking earliest, younger members staying up latest, creating a rolling wave of partial wakefulness covering nearly the entire night. Samson has a name for it: the poorly sleeping grandparent hypothesis. Your grandmother's light sleep isn't a disorder. It might be a 2 million-year-old security system, still quietly running. Think about what that actually means for a group sleeping through a hot, dangerous night. Nobody had to volunteer for a shift, and nobody had to be woken up on a schedule. The variation was already baked into the group, distributed automatically across every age range present, so that at almost any given moment, someone's eyes were already open. Now here's the part that sounds completely backwards, and it's genuinely one of my favorite pieces of research on this whole subject. You'd assume the hottest climates on Earth call for the least clothing possible. Cultures actually living in those climates disagree, wrapping themselves head to toe in heavy fabric, often dark, often loose. In 1980, a joint team from Harvard and Tel Aviv University tested this directly in Israel's Negev desert, putting a volunteer in the sun for 30 minutes in 4 separate outfits: a black robe, a white robe, a military uniform, and bare skin. Both robes, black and white, kept the wearer measurably cooler than near nudity. The fabric intercepted solar radiation before it reached skin at all, and the loose draping created something close to a chimney. Air entered at the hem, warmed against the body, rose, and escaped at the collar, continuously pulling fresh air in behind it. That robe wasn't clothing in the way you think of it. It was a passive ventilation system, built entirely from cloth and geometry, no different in principle from the fan currently sitting in your bedroom. Biology and bedding and clothing all had a ceiling, though. Eventually, humans stopped adapting their bodies and started redesigning their buildings around the exact same problem. Around 6,000 years ago in southern Mesopotamia, Sumerian builders packed homes wall to wall in mud brick thick enough to function as thermal batteries, soaking up daytime heat and releasing it slowly overnight, with narrow streets engineered purely to keep buildings shading each other. Egyptians pushed the idea further. A tomb painting from around 1300 BCE shows a rooftop structure called a malkaf, a wind-catching scoop that funneled moving air down into rooms below, run past wet reed mats hung in doorways that cooled the air further through simple evaporation. The most extreme version of this idea sits in Yazd, in central Iran, where badgirs, tall wind-catching towers, still rise above rooftops by the hundreds, pulling air down through shafts, sometimes across underground water channels called qanats, engineered as far back as roughly 700 BCE, and beneath dome structures called yakchals, some dating to 400 BCE. Persian engineers stored winter ice through the brutal desert summer using walls of a special mortar thick enough to stay essentially impervious to heat. People in the 5th century BCE were eating chilled desserts in the middle of a desert. No electricity, just mud, wind, and centuries of trial and error. So here's the twist worth carrying to bed tonight. None of these were separate solutions to separate problems. They were layers stacked on top of each other, one system covering exactly where the previous one ran out of road. Biology handled the body. Ash and bedding handled the ground. Timing handled the worst hours. Community handled the vulnerable ones. Cloth and architecture handled everything biology alone couldn't finish. That same rate of vasodilation, warm hands and feet as your body dumps heat before sleep, still happens in you tonight, and researchers at the University of Basel have found it's one of the strongest predictors of exactly how fast you'll fall asleep. You'll close your eyes in a room you engineered with a button instead of ash and grass and centuries of dead insects. But the mechanism running underneath the thermostat is the same one that kept a person alive in a South African rock shelter 200,000 years ago, and every single piece of it is still standing guard inside you, waiting, quietly, for permission from the air. See you in the next one.